Redemptions, redemptions, redemptions. That is the topic for today, and whether or not Panini is going to be in a position to fulfill their NFL redemptions. I've had a number of people, frantically ask me this in the last 12 to 14 hours following the news we spoke about in a video a little bit earlier today. You're going to see this a day after, regarding the NFL Players Association terminating their agreement with Panini following some, unscrupulous activity is the rumor. Now, if you haven't seen that video, essentially the NFLPA terminated this. They've signed with Fanatics effective immediately. And this means that, effective immediately, once again, that Panini can no longer produce cards of players, use their names or their likeness on trading cards outside of the select few players they have exclusive agreements with. Now, this has obviously taken the hobby by storm. It's raised a lot of questions, as we did discuss a little bit earlier. But people are starting to get a little bit scared as to what this actually means for their open redemptions. And I think there's probably three outcomes here that I want to talk to that are all pretty interesting. And apologies if you can hear this crazy rainstorm right now. But some of these should, concern you a little bit. And I think the one that would be the most concerning is that Panini are not going to be in a position to fulfill these cards, right? To fulfill these redemptions. And the reason why I think that is probably a really plausible outcome is just based on how they've approached redemption fulfillment in the last 2 to 3 years, right? We discussed very recently with a soccer card, right? You had these Ronaldo impeccable cards that are still active redemptions in that product being handed out to people as replacements before that redemption has expired. And essentially that means that Panini is taking cards that are, in current product and giving them to people as redemption replacements from years prior, meaning that the people that have that Ronaldo active redemption can no longer redeem that Ronaldo because they've been given to someone else, right? They're using today's cards to fulfill yesterday's redemptions, and they just keep shifting the bucket down the line. And the reason why I think this is concerning in this specific instance is that if you have NFL redemptions out there, right, which there are obviously many, and they could no longer produce NFL trading cards, if they were planning to use the upcoming releases of these trading cards to fulfill the redemptions from, right now and prior years, they're not going to be able to do that, right? Because there's no more cards coming in the future, which is a big bloody problem. That's pretty concerning. And if that's the trend that Panini were hoping to take, they can't use those now because they're not going to exist, because it would break, laws. It would be, unlawful for them to produce licensed cards given they've lost the license with the NFLPA. And I think if you have active football redemptions, you should be very bloody concerned that that is the case. Now, the one thing here that I think Ken Golden flagged in his live stream on Instagram earlier today is the second point that goes to why this might not actually happen. So from Ken's perspective, and he thinks this is the most likely outcome, and this is the second point that I'm going to talk to, is that if Fanatics want to come in and try and do good for this hobby, it would be really poor for them to start off on the wrong foot. And that wrong foot being something like this that prevents Panini being able to fulfill redemptions that are currently open, which is the scenario that I just explained. So with that in mind, his position is that Fanatics will allow Panini to fulfill these until they're basically all gone and off their books, because that would be the right thing to do for the hobby. Now, that is a very fair statement to make, and one that probably makes a whole lot of sense if Fanatics is not looking to piss off the customer base, right, the collectors. But whether we actually see that in practice is still left to be answered, right? We don't really know. And judging by how Fanatics has moved in recent months, it very much looks like they are very profit focused. And some of these things they've said about wanting to make the hobby a better place for collectors doesn't appear to be all that true. Now, things can change, obviously, and I'm basing that statement off, Fanatics coming in and saying they're going to remove redemptions completely and they're going to remove the number of parallels, yet since they've come in, they've added more redemption types, and they've also added more parallel types via these frozen and negative parallels and all that sort of stuff. So if we take that belief system from them, right, that position they've taken that goes against the words of what they said, well, does that mean they're also going to do it in this instance? That is also possible. And by that I mean, could they do the wrong thing and not allow Panini to fulfill these redemptions? Ken thinks otherwise, but that seems to be a thing that they might try and do, right? They might allow Panini to do this to help them, make the hobby a better place before they leave, right? And I think the final point that I want to talk to very quickly is an interesting one once again, because you've had Fanatics essentially attempt to buy Panini in the past, right? And some of the reason why that broke down had to do with the liability on Panini's balance sheet, the liability being the number of redemptions that are currently out there. And this is going to be the most tinfoil theory of the three. And part of me has this suspicion that Fanatics still wants to buy Panini for their IP, right? Because their products like Flawless, Eminence, NT, etc. is really popular. They're really good brand names to try and own, especially if you want to be as big as what Fanatics is trying to say. So an interesting move from them would be that if Fanatics wanted to buy Panini, but they wanted to remove that risk on their balance sheet, a quick way to do that would be to try and rug pull the NFL and other players' associations away from Panini. And if we see that the NBA follows suit and some of these other ones, and Panini's left with no players' associations, meaning they can no longer produce any cards, meaning that first example I gave maybe holds strong and Panini's not in a position to fulfill these redemptions, they might file for bankruptcy. They might go insolvent if they can't fulfill them, right? They don't have the funds on hand to produce more cards to fulfill them. They don't have the cards on hand to fulfill the redemptions, so they have to go bankrupt, which means their books get wiped clean, the creditors and debtors take what they want, and then basically Fanatics can come in and scoop Panini up for cents on the dollar and then not have that liability sitting on their balance sheet, right? Those redemptions needing to be fulfilled, that requirement for those to be fulfilled would no longer be there because they've basically gone insolvent and they're not a business anymore. The only thing that would be valuable to the Panini name would be these IPs that I touched on a little bit earlier, like Flawless, Eminence, etc. And that is very tinfoil, right? That Fanatics has played the long game here. It's done some, Gordan Gecko style stuff from Wall Street to try and reduce the price of Panini, and a lot of that stuff is very, very illegal. So I don't think we'll ever get an answer as to whether or not that's happened. But I wouldn't be surprised if this was, somewhat true or is a tangible possibility. I think it's the most ludicrous of the three. I think the most likely one is the one that Ken explained a little bit earlier. But I think that first one as well is something that's very, very tangible, something that's entirely possible of occurring. We could see Panini not be in a position to fulfill these redemptions because of the way they've tried to fulfill them in recent years. They're basically using today's cards to fulfill yesterday's redemptions, and they're now chasing their tail because no more cards are coming through. This was a bit of a rant. I hope it made sense, but those three scenarios I think need to be kept front of mind because we could have a very precarious situation coming up with these redemptions, and I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on each of those down in the comments below, and also whether or not you think there's any others that I'm not quite aware of myself, because I think there's one we need to watch this space on. And like I said in my video yesterday, I think we're going to see the NBA Players Association also follow suit, which means we could have a very interesting outlook on the hobby in the next 3 years, because it could be the end of Panini, right? And in the grand scheme of things, I don't actually think that's the case. I think we might see Panini stick around and produce unlicensed cards in the absolute worst case scenario, purely because they've basically got so much of this game use stuff on hand and all that sort of thing. And I think they'll just sign exclusive athletes to try and produce this unlicensed stuff to stay relevant. I think more competition is better for this industry. We don't want monopolies. I've talked in the past about, the good things that Fanatics could be bringing, but I'm not overly happy about this. I think a lot of people are misguided by getting super excited about what's happening here, because I think at the end of the day, us as consumers are always the ones that are left suffering, and just the trends that we've seen from Fanatics so far don't fill me with a whole lot of confidence. So as always, please share your thoughts down in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.